How'd you get to where you are right now at Cleaver Brooks? How I'm more interested. How'd you get into boilers or controls?
Back in 1997, I had started my first kind of career as in the audio recording industry, and I was living in Manhattan with my grandmother. And that was because I didn't go to college, and I went to one of those audio trade schools with an internship. And I did an internship in Manhattan doing radio commercials. And after a certain amount of time with that, I was offered a full-time job. But back then, well, as it is now, New York's a very expensive city. I didn't want to live with a million roommates. And the neighborhoods I could afford to live in back then are actually, of course, expensive and trendy now. But so I decided to move back to Seattle where my parents lived. And I was going to work at a recording studio out in Seattle, but they were under remodeling. So in the time period when they were being remodeled, I got hooked up with a job by a family friend, somebody I had worked for at his wife's bookstore when I was a teenager. And it was like, you want to work at our family business and work in the warehouse. It was basically a rep firm in Seattle. And so started there at the ground level, 21 years old, and worked there 15 years. Worked my way up. Started doing electrical building on electrician on skid packages, assembling cast iron boilers, doing startups of different things. We did a lot of hydronic there. So I did startups of hydronic boilers, some of the steam boilers we did, pumps, started getting into controls. By the end of the 15 years, I was really doing all the control panels that company made for lead lag primarily and pump control panels. And at that point, we're looking for a change. I was about to have my first child of my own. I have some stepkids as well. And Seattle was also getting expensive. Thought maybe we should try Midwest living. Reached out to get a job at SCC and got hired there. And we relocated to the Chicago area. And that's what starts, me living in the Midwest and getting a little broader exposure. That first 15 years was working at a rep company, selling Burnham boilers, Burnham boilers, power flame burners, Armstrong pumps, and having the regional exposure. I worked a lot in Alaska, Oregon, Idaho, Washington State, but that's when I got into the more national and global boiler world that we're all involved in now.
Is the Midwest boiler market different than the Northwest, like Washington?
I assume that there's some differences, but I've never really been super in tune with the Midwest market by itself, because since I've been in the Midwest, I've really been working for, SCC. I worked for FireEye Remote. Now I work for Cleaver. It's not really something I deal with primarily the Midwest. I do see the Midwest reps a little more often because I'm in closer proximity, but I don't really know how different it is when it comes to actually selling the equipment in the area particularly well.
Got it. Maybe a little bit more snow, but the climate's probably generally pretty close to each other, unless you go super north. I don't know if the top of Minnesota is the Midwest technically, though. So what are you doing with Cleaver Brooks right now?
My title at Cleaver Brooks is Corporate Director of Controls. So I work for the corporate, which is based out of Thomasville. And what that involves is anything that's common to different business units. So I don't work specifically for package boilers or deaerators or any of the affiliate companies, burners. I work for corporate as a whole.
Got it. And what part of Cleaver Brooks is out of Milwaukee?
Milwaukee is where Cleaver Brooks fundamentally started. And so in one of the older buildings is our R&D center, and the package boiler group, the sales office is based out of Milwaukee. But I think that is the city Cleaver Brooks is best known for. But the corporate offices are down in Thomasville, Georgia.
Thomasville, and I've always kind of been confused about this. Can you tell me what is the difference between the equipment that's made in Thomasville versus the equipment that's made in Canada?
Sure. The packaged fire tube boilers are made in Thomasville. And in Canada, they make our flexible products, flex tube boilers, and our deaerators. There's some other small things, but those are the primary product lines. And then we also make large IWT boilers in Lincoln, Nebraska, at another factory.
Yes, that well, I guess, do they still call it Nebraska Water Tubes? I mean, you bought the name, bought the company name. I don't know if they still use that name.
Uh, that's a legacy name now. It's not used on new products. It's just Cleaver Brooks.
Got it. So, were you, I don't know at the corporate level, but if you were you involved in the new control system that Cleaver rolled out in the last, whatever, I think within the last year, the EOS, I believe?
Yes, yeah, I've been involved in that pretty heavily. That's one of the main projects I've been working on.
So, can you explain where that fits in the market versus the Hawk system? Why the name? Does EOS stand for something? And why is it not a Hawk product?
Yeah, it's the name Eos is a Greek goddess, so it's not a doesn't it's not an abbreviation for anything. It was just a different family name because the Hawk is Allen Bradley PLC based, and that's not necessarily a hard and fast rule that we would have to follow. But we thought since it's a bit different from the Hawk 1000 and 4000 product, we'd come up with a different name. For us, it's filling in the gap that was left vacated by the Control Links platform, which we typically referred to as FARC, Fuel Air Ratio Control. It was our value offering, and we really didn't have a value offering after that was gone. We jumped from linkage to Hawk 1000, which, while it's a good control system, it wasn't quite as inexpensive. So we just wanted to have another offering that was in that price point.
Got it. And EOS would be, hey, I have a boiler or a burner, and I need the bare minimum for parallel positioning. That would be a good application for it, like just enough to get by.
Yeah, I mean, we consider it to be like we have the tiers. That's the value tier, the functionality tier, the performance tier, kind of like the trim levels on a car. You get a little bit more as you step it up, but we'd like to think, at the value tier, we still have a good product offering, maybe a little bit more than the bare minimum.
Yeah, bare minimum for options. A lot of people, they want to bolt on options to a boiler, but not everybody has parallel or as O2 trim and the need for, just all these different various sensors that as you step up in platforms, they have the capabilities for. But if you buy that platform and you don't use the capabilities, you're essentially paying for stuff that you don't need. And that's where you get the value. I assume this value item, and it fits that market. Just because it's on a lower cost point doesn't mean it's not a good product. I think a lot of people will make that mistake. It's about meeting the customer where they're at. Just because they can't afford or don't want the best thing doesn't mean you can't have a product for them. And that's, I assume,
Yeah.
you want to cover that entire range.
Yeah, you're making a good point. I think sometimes customers may end up with something that's a little bit more than what they need, such as they may not connect every option available. And, in hindsight, maybe it's not always the best way for them to spend their money. And if you can provide them something that's a better fit for their budget or their needs, I mean, sometimes it's not even the budget. You can just say, that's too much for you. We have something that's more appropriate, and you'll save a little money as well. And that's actually true for a lot of different companies that make controls. The value products are not necessarily, there's nothing wrong with them in terms of functionality. It's just that you're going to hit limits on what they can do. So if you want to add some additional features, maybe you consider buying a different product from the beginning, because you're going to run into your limits as you get stage up with your products. How many things you can connect, what you can do with it. And that's where the EOS fits in. It's going to have some limits. If you reach the limits, we have something else for you.
And the Hawk platform, can you explain the difference between the 1000 and the 4000?
Yeah, the Hawk 1000 is going to be, so our functionality tier, it's going to do some of the advanced parallel positioning options. It's going to have more curve sets or more actuators, and then the EOS, it's going to add O2 trim. It's going to have the built-in lead lag, some of the things the Hawk 4000 is going to have. But then as you step up to the Hawk 4000, now you're going to add some additional boiler-related functionality like the water level control, draft control, some additional things that are going to be built into it as part of the package boiler assembly. So it's more targeted towards the package of the boiler when you get into that tier.
And if I have multiple boilers with a Hawk system, do you have like a plant controller that would connect all the boilers together to make a steam plant?
Yeah, they have built-in lead lag where you can connect two systems together. Otherwise, we have what we call our host panel, which can connect up to 8. We have a host panel 4 and a host panel 8, depending on how many you have, that can connect Hawk 1000 or 4000s together. And that's a separate panel that's going to have a centralized control with a header, pressure transmitter, or water temperature transmitter.
What are the benefits? Say I have 4 fire tube boilers running at 100 psi. What are the benefits of having them all on a Hawk 1000 or 4000 control system that is all connected into a master panel? What are the benefits on the customer side at a high level overview of how your steam plant's going to run versus, maybe what a typical steam plant would have that doesn't have all that connectivity?
Yeah, this is a good question. That's in general for any kind of a master panel, or we call it a host panel. When you move the control to a central location, in the central location, the header is where you want the steam to be. So if you're running it without any sort of a control system, every boiler is measuring the pressure at its own vessel, and it's running to its own pressure, completely independently of everything else. So you could be running multiple boilers where you don't need to. When you control it from a central location where you want the steam, the host panel can then decide what's the best way. How many do you need to run? Do you run multiples in parallel? Do you run them sequentially? And a lot of that has to do with how you configure it. And if you are typically going to be running only one, do you want them to alternate on hours so that you even out the runtime? So you're going to have a more efficient operation of the system as a whole, and you're also going to even out the runtime on all the different boilers that you have. And then you can add additional things to it as well, like if applicable, outside a reset for the set point, you can connect it to a BACnet or to a building automation system, plant SCADA system, whatever the case may be. You can run pumps from it, so now you're adding additional capabilities that maybe you didn't have from the individual boiler from the boiler manufacturer or from the control manufacturer. I think I heard you speaking in another one of your interviews how the boiler manufacturers or the controls OEMs are going to have more expertise on running a boiler plant than, say, a general building automation platform will. So it's that concept. If you leave them all standalone and you have the building automation run it, you may have pretty good operation, but if you do it from a boiler host or master panel, you're going to get, the most optimized you're going to get for that equipment.
Yes, I'm always a big proponent of allow the experts to do what they want, and some engineers or designers believe that, hey, if we bring in our controls contractor and we allow them to custom design everything, then this building will be custom and everything will mesh together perfectly. Well, now you're asking that controls contractor be an expert on boiler operation, lead lag, sequential, parallel, whereas instead you can just trust the boiler manufacturer or controls manufacturer and then just tap into their panel and receive information from the panel, be able to command it on certain command points, but the actual operation of how the boilers run, how deaerators ran, how the pumps all run, how the whole boiler room in this case runs, that is all set up by the boiler manufacturer, by the controls manufacturer as a prepackaged system. And I've experienced before where I've had to hold a control contractor's hand and show them how to program because their scope had said, hey, you must program the entire operation of the boiler system. I've also had it where those contractors have that same scope. And then I show them, I'm like, hey, my panel already does that. Like all you're doing is tying into it. Like there's no need for you to, have all this functionality on your end when it's already here. And it's a lot of redundancy, but that goes back to education of the contractors, education for engineers on why a prepackaged system from the experts and why you can rely on that instead of constantly making everything custom for every single building, which adds a lot of cost for the owner.
Yeah, what they're good at, what the building automation is good at is general control, using general control principles of a lot of different systems. So, if they have something more basic, what they offer is probably perfect for a building owner. But when you want to get into some more nuanced control algorithms and techniques of the boiler, they're not going to know anything about that, And I've worked at SCC where I did control panels and FireEye where I worked on controls, and now Cleaver, and it's the same fundamentals for all of those companies as far as the nuanced algorithms for boilers. There's things that are more common to you and I that building automation people wouldn't understand, thermal shock and some of those more advanced concepts that they might just overlook because that's not really what they do.
Can you explain the difference in, I don't know, I'm not too familiar with the Hawk functionality versus the master panel, but when would a customer control the header pressure or control a steam plant on header pressure versus steam flow, or both?
Well, I mean, what you're trying to make is steam. So, I mean, if you're looking for a set point of the set point's always going to typically be in PSI. Now, at least I'm talking about in commercial boilers. When you get into industrial, I'm not as well versed in that. So when you're doing fully metered systems, that's not my area of expertise necessarily. I mean, I'm not completely ignorant of it, but typically you're going to go with a set point of PSI. And so that's where you're going to be controlling it to. So you're going to base your firing rate onto that. And when you're fully metered, you're measuring the steam flow to determine what your gas flow and your airflow need to be. So that's part of the fully metered system, but you're going to control to PSI for your set point.
And does the Hawk 1000 have the fully metered capability, or is that only going to be a 4000?
Our Hawk 1000 and 4000 are going to be parallel positioning systems. We do have another system called the Hawk 4500 for our IWT boilers that's going to have the option of being fully metered. And it's fundamentally a lot like the Hawk 4000, but it's specialized for IWT. And that does have the option to do fully metered. And we also offer customized controls for IWTs that are not part of the Hawk family at all. So we have the full range depending on what product we're selling.
Yeah, essentially as the boiler gets bigger, especially with water tubes, obviously the project has more money, but it allows more customization rather than smaller package boilers where budgets are tighter and owners just want to pay for hot water or steam, and they have a cost fix. As you get larger, the costs kind of start moving around and you can start affording all that customization that I assume Cleaver Brooks can provide for a industrial water tube.
Yeah, that's true. Most of as it gets more expensive, customization becomes more common. In fact, we don't customize the EOS or the Hawk 1000. We do offer it for the 4000 to our customers and our IWT products as well. But something I talk about in some of my presentations to our reps and customers is that when it comes to control systems, they're kind of a fixed price. So an EOS, a Hawk 1000, a Hawk 4000, a Siemens LMV5, a FireEye NXF 4000, whatever it is, the system basically costs the same no matter what. If your boiler costs $50,000, the controls are going to be a pretty significant percentage of that. If the boiler costs $500,000, now those same controls are not such a big percentage of it. So the controls are kind of always the same price. When it becomes a small percentage of it, you can really afford to, and you probably also have a need to have a more robust control system. And it doesn't, and it becomes a smaller part of the cost.
On the hydronic side, as far as hydronic boiler offerings, does Cleaver Brooks have the same thing wherein you have a integral controller into your hydronic boilers? I know you have multiple different lines. Probably, let's see, clear fire, I believe, is the condensing, and all those controllers, I assume, talk to each other. You can connect all the boilers together.
Yeah, we have a control platform called Ember, and it's not a product I support to a large scale, but I know a little bit about it. It has integrated lead lag, like you mentioned, and it's a dedicated controller for those products.
And those boilers on the hydronic side and on the steam side, I constantly see the total boiler solutions. Essentially, Cleaver Brooks can provide a full hydronic heating plant and a full steam plant without any other manufacturer's components, right? So it can be one giant system if the customer desires.
Yeah, Cleaver Brooks can provide engineered package skid systems as well as individual components. So we have a pretty broad offering for the boiler room.
And Cleaver Brooks owns industrial combustion. Does the do the burner offerings from industrial combustion, are they they seem to look the same as Cleaver Brooks? Do they just get painted a different color? Is
Yeah, the burners offered. So we have two distribution channels. Cleaver Brooks has one rep network. Industrial combustion has another rep network. A lot of the burners are going to be the same, and you can see that on our website. Same names: V burners, D burners, etc. And the Cleaver Brooks are going to be called Profire burners, and industrial combustion is the industrial combustion brand of burners, and they do have different distribution networks.
got it. As far as the future boiler controls, is there, I guess, what should the market expect? Does AI come into any talks or innovation, or will the last 10 years be the next 10 years as far as just trying to optimize for energy efficiency?
Yeah, AI is maybe the wrench in the works. I don't have a good answer for you on AI. I would expect there to be some integration with it, though, but it's such a new thing, right? Look over the last 2 years how crazy it's gotten. 2 years ago we barely had heard of ChatGPT, and now they're talking about how we could have 20% unemployment in 10 years because AI is taking all the white collar entry level jobs. So it's a little scary, but I think if you look at boiler controls and you want to make the analogy, I have a good friend, Peter Pinto, over at SCC, and he always makes these analogies of automotive. If you look at the car technology and you go back about 20 years, that's where boilers are. If you look at cars now, your car is basically your engine is a boiler, right? The water temperature, the coolant's basically the water temperature of a boiler water. It's fully metered. It's got mass airflow, and they do this all at a very low price point. Their O2 sensors are inexpensive relatively. Mass airflow, relatively inexpensive. They're metering the fuel. They're doing all of that. You don't have to commission a car like you used to with a carburetor. If you think about it, a carburetor was kind of like a linkage burner back in the day. You manually set it all up. Well, now cars don't need any of that. And so I think that's what the future is going to be. You're going to measure the gas flow directly. You're basically going to convert it. Everything's going to basically be fully metered at some point. And it's not going to be expensive components or particularly daunting like it is now. It's going to be brought down to a level where it's going to be very common. That's what I expect to see. I don't necessarily know how quickly we'll get there, but I think you'll still start to see components in the market in the next 5 to 10 years that take steps towards that, I think.
So the question is then, how do we get people trained up in the industry? As we can barely train them on the systems now, and every single company is like, nobody wants to work anymore. Where are all the good people?
Right.
How do we train on these more complicated boiler controls as well as all the old stuff?
Well, I think you have to appeal to the workforce that you might have available. If you're going to hold on to, old school mentality, as a company, you might have a hard time attracting younger people. If you look at, where a lot of the graduates are coming from, there's a lot of engineers, not as many people in the trades, so if you if you can appeal to get people into the trades, the boiler manufacturers, controls manufacturers getting involved, and Cleaver does this at some different levels, getting involved with the trade schools, maybe getting involved with some of the engineering programs. You got to have exposure early and then be willing to, you know, adapt your expectations to what the workforce can bring to you. So what's important to the workforce? Do they want flexibility? To the point where you can do it. I think when you're too rigid in your old school mentalities, you might be cutting yourself off from potential, employees. And I think you got to consider, again, what's important to them, what kind of benefits they need, all of that, and how can they grow with you. I think people are very interested in their progression, and you see a lot of people switching jobs. If you can provide stability and demonstrate that this is a place where you can grow and will train you, those are things after you get the people. Like for me, I came up from, no education, no real high school education, no college in the beginning. I did end up getting a college degree later. I got a computer science degree online, when I was 40 years old. But, in the beginning, I started out at the ground level. And I think, offering opportunities there as well can really be beneficial. Identifying what somebody brings to you, like if somebody seems to have the capabilities of learning, identifying that early and then providing them those tools. And I think you have to look at it in such a way that not necessarily look too far down the line. Like if I can help you now, what can you do for me? But, be more interested in the person's development. And then I think you'll find that it works out better for you in the long run.
Yeah, that's good. It's hard to balance there was a trend. I think people are walking kind of away from it, but the basically open office, come in when you want, go out when you want. And that was really not really in the boiler industry, but like Google, Apple, all the FANG, all those companies had pushed that work culture, endless vacation, ping pong tables, coffee in the office, and then versus the boiler industry when you're supporting manufacturers or customers that run 24/7 and you have on call for service technicians and you try to get parts put together from nameplates that people are trying to send you that don't have all the information, that are blurry, and there's deadlines and shutdowns and all this stuff. It's very difficult to, your business is almost ran by your customers at that point, and you can't say, oh, like, you have a shutdown the week of July 4th. Yeah, we're good. We're not working. You're gonna lose that customer, or a customer needs something. You can't say, oh, it's going to be the next day when we get there. Yeah, just, we're not going to come out because our technician wants to go home and watch his kids at a soccer game. Like it's hard. It's hard to find that balance. Obviously, every company would want all their people to be home whenever they want to be home and to work exactly the hours they want to work. But with boilers, it could be a very demanding industry that I think a lot of people are just not used to, as a lot of it's hidden, and we have it pretty good in America. And if you've never really had to solve problems and you get through high school, you're now thrown in, you join the industry, you join skilled trades, anything, and now you actually have to fix problems, and then you can't just walk away and make it somebody else's problem. It could be a culture shock to a lot of people. What the answer is, I don't know. But trying to evolve to, I wouldn't say you have to meet the new generation, but you just have to meet people how they are. You're not going to find new people that want to work for you for $15 an hour. Like, that's not realistic. Even $20 an hour, it's pushing it. But I've seen companies trying to hire for $15 to $20 an hour for brand new people. And then their justification is, well, they don't know anything, so why would I pay them more than that? Well, then you ask them to, clean out a sooted boiler and all this stuff. And you can preach to them all the career projections of what they could earn and the corporate ladder that they could climb. But that doesn't really matter to that person who can't pay their rent on $18-15 an hour, which is difficult, but that's you gotta change from the company side of view and how you view starting out. It's different than when people 30 years ago. It's different than even 10 years ago. 2020 to 2022 really changed the job market and how people see jobs and how money is earned from companies, which is difficult for an industry that is very demanding sometimes. Depends on where you are.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. I think yeah, some of the things you brought up definitely balanced out. I mean, unlimited vacation. I know friends that had that, and they said you couldn't take it because the pressure was such that if you actually took the vacation, then you were kind of on the outs. So they handled these things in different ways. But I think we've kind of balanced out. A lot more people are in the office, but when I worked at FireEye, it was owned by Carrier, and Carrier had a very simple corporate policy that I liked. It was just called like dress for your day or work for your day, meaning like you can wear, if somebody's coming to the office, wear better clothes. If somebody's coming to the office, go to the office. If there's nothing going on that day, work from home that day. They kept it simple because they wanted to give you more control over yourself. And I think that's the kind of thing that the younger generation finds important. Obviously, if you work for a boiler company or a rep or something, you can't have full autonomy and work from home most of the time. But if you have to go to a startup, go to a startup. And for me, I mean, you say we have it good in America, and I think we do because a lot of us, really enjoy what we do. But when I work with colleagues at my last couple jobs in Europe and other countries, they definitely are more like that. It's 4:30, call me tomorrow. It's the weekend, I'm not answering the phone. I think a lot of the people in our industry, you'll find will pick up the phone at all hours and help you. And so, in exchange for that, maybe you get a little bit more flexibility, and that's the kind of thing people like to see. And they invest in you, and then you're more invested in them.
Yeah, the American way of doing business is much different than the rest of the world, and that I have heard that. I've never been to Europe, but I have heard that it is much slower, especially on the construction side. But also, they have a lot more innovation on the construction side, and the way they do things is a lot more innovative. And on the energy side, Europe has different problems than America for energy, and they're trying to electrify and get rid of boilers and do all this stuff because they have different they have reduced amount of energy available and all this stuff, which is just, it goes into culture. And the American culture right now, even in 2025, is work as much as you can and nothing can wait. Everything's an emergency. And even on the corporate side, some companies expect people to just constantly answer emails, even though they're working on salary for 60 grand a year, and you can never turn off your job with the internet and cell phones. I never worked in a world where there weren't cell phones, but if you went home in 1995, nobody was calling you on your way home, or nobody was calling your home phone, um, unless there was a super emergency. But even then, like, oh, well, what are we going to do? Like, we got to wait till tomorrow because nobody's open, or I can't find, I got to call somebody for parts or information. Like the constantly available, constant immediate information is very difficult, especially I know for service technicians with on-call. If you go online, there's a lot of companies that constantly preach we're available 24/7. And if you don't have the right structure around that, that can tear down people and wear out people very, very quickly.
Yeah,
And
I
it's,
can see that.
yeah, I mean, it's a hard industry, especially, everybody likes to think, the harder my job is, the more I should get paid. And that's not always true. There are people that work half as hard as you and make twice as much. And I think that's the internet allowing us to compare, especially social media, allowing us to compare ourselves to other people. And then a younger person can look online and they say, hey, these people are just posting pictures and brand deals and making all this money. Why would I work 60-hour weeks for $20 an hour? And like I said, they don't see the career projections. But they're looking at the 1% of the 1%. It's like looking at an actor and saying, hey, they made a ton of money for this movie that took 4 months to shoot. Like, why would I work at a job? But I also know on the flip side, I know tons of technicians or people that work in sales or that love the industry, that love what they do, and they are excited about helping customers and solve problems every single day, which
Yeah,
is
I
very
think
important.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't want to say that the boiler industry is the only one like this, because I bet the reality is, if you find any other industry that we have friends in, like whatever it is, flooring or whatever, I bet they feel the same way about their industries as we do. But all I know is the boiler industry, and like you said, most people, they really end up loving it. And when you do, it doesn't feel like work. Maybe we work too much. I like to be available to people. And I worked with a guy everybody seems to know, David Lair, who's famous for always answering his phone at SCC. And that's what builds you up your good reputation in this industry, is being available and how you help solve problems. Everybody has problems, but what you're judged on is how you solve the problems, right? And I think if you highlight to the younger people, how, as a whole, like how your life can be, I think that might excite them more too. This is how it can be over the long run. You can have a whole career in an industry of great people. You'll love what you do. You'll get to do, one thing I think we get to do in the boiler industry that not everybody gets to do is you get to travel whether it's regionally, different boiler rooms, nationally, internationally, whatever it is, you get a lot of variety. You're not in the same office every day for the most part. You don't have the same day every day regardless. It's always something different, right? And that really makes it easier to go to work as well. I think highlighting some of the things that make it special, but then also taking care of them, giving them appropriate pay, giving them opportunities, training them, keeping them engaged. I mean, the truth of the matter is the people that are really good at this don't have problems finding better jobs, don't have problems getting paid. And so, companies do whatever they have to keep those people, and some of those people, you see them around online.
Yeah. The problem is, can't only hire A motivated players. You have to make room for B's and C's.
Right.
And
that's true. I mean, everybody has a job to do, right? There's going to always be some people that are going home at 4:30, and but they do an important role when they're there. You're not going to have all. That's a good point.
Yeah. There's a bell curve and everything. And yeah, the problems aren't just the boiler industry. All skilled trades have this problem. Everybody's having this conversation, even outside of that. But we're a niche of a niche. HVAC is a larger market. Boilers are a niche.
And we're not even HVAC. We're just the H.
Yeah. But even like process, I'll talk with people and they're like, oh, what do you do? And, oh, do you know what a boiler is? No, I have no idea what a boiler is. Well, if the general public has no idea what a boiler is, how is somebody supposed to get into an industry that they don't even know what the main thing is, or they've never even heard of it, or they say, oh, isn't that thing in old houses? It's like, well, you're a nurse, you work at a hospital. Do you ever wonder how all that stuff gets sterilized? It's a boiler, that's steam. And you start educating them, but there's an education hurdle. And I think we as an industry have done a poor job at educating people outside of the industry, because we've always had plenty of work, and we don't companies typically don't run traditional advertising, and they say, oh, we have plenty of work, we're good, but you're almost not advertising for yourself for work. You're advertising for employees and awareness in your community of, hey, like, we're a great place to work, or this is a great career, come work here. But you can't advertise when you need the help. Like, you can't just put up an ad, say, hey, we're hiring for this, and expect an amazing person to walk through the door, in the first week. It takes years and years.
It happens every now and then, but for the most part, no, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, in 2025,
it depends where you are too. I mean, if you're in a more remote location, it's even more difficult.
And yeah, so like the great people I know that are like, that are self-starters solving problems, they're not looking on Indeed or for advertising about where they want to go. They make relationships with people in different parts of the industry, and they already know where they're going before they, leave a job, or, what they want to do, because they go through relationships. And that's big thing, is developing relationships and being able to have somebody to call to figure out problems, as you mentioned before. Being available to pick up the phone and talk somebody through a problem, or to put some
Yeah.
knowledge down.
Well, I do have some good advice for somebody younger. I mean, and you've done this. You have to advocate for yourself. I mean, when you get to a certain point in your career, you have to realize, as you're getting older, your opportunities aren't going to always be the same. That might not be fair, but that's kind of the way it is, right? You get judged a little bit by your age. And, for myself, when I got to the 15-year mark of my first job at the rep company, and, to myself, I'm in my mid-30s, I'm thinking, what's the next step for me? I work for a family-owned rep company. In hindsight, it might not have been true. If I would have been more upfront and said to them, this is what I'd like in my career, maybe I would have found that I could have been on an ownership track or something like that. I don't know now, but in my mind, I'm thinking this is the end of the road for me. And rather than having the conversation with my boss, I thought, let's look for something that in my mind has more upside for my career and what I want to do. So I did have in mind what I wanted to do with my career, and I took steps to get there. But my advice to the younger people moving up is, when you get to a certain point, know what you want to do, but you can be open with your boss and say, look, this is what I'd like to do in my career by this time. How can you help me with that? And, and if you know that just can't happen, always keep your options open, and try to find a situation that you can do what you want to do with your career, because, you only get one, right? So,
And don't be afraid to move. I see a lot of people afraid to move from their hometown. Oh, my parents are here. Oh, I have family here. And they want to move and go explore, but they feel obligated to stay. And, you move from Washington to Illinois, and, opened up different career opportunities. If you say, hey, I'm not happy where I'm at, but I don't want to move, you are severely limiting your career, and you can always move back. I try to tell people all the time. Yes, it costs money, and yes, you're losing time, but there are people that move away and move back 2 years later, but now they know. But there's people that move away and they're like, I'm never going back. I love this. I love this new job. I love this new
or move
space.
somewhere else, right? Move to a new third place,
Yeah. There's tons of opportunity. I think a lot of people pigeonhole themselves on what they know and what they are familiar with, instead of going for it. But it's hard. It takes a lot of courage to move to an unfamiliar area where you don't know anybody, to work for a company that you don't really know. It takes a lot of trust.
Yeah, I know you moved to Florida, right? From Ohio. I think I talked to you once at ABMA, Boiler Expo, about that, but I don't know if you would mind giving me the quick, little story about your career real quick, because I'm not sure everybody's heard it lately.
Was a service technician for 7 years, and was looking around the industry and, thinking all the same thoughts that we had talked about previously. And I always had a passion for education and training. And I realized that I can't work in the industry and work on the industry at the same time. You cannot fix boilers by day and teach people at night. There's just not enough hours in the day, not enough personal energy. And, I'm 31 now, so I was 29 at the time, all of 2 years ago. 29, still a baby, but I was looking at what all the companies with money had, or what we're doing for training. And basically I decided that they're not doing enough. Even if they did more, it's probably not enough with training and education and outreach. And instead of waiting on other people to solve the problem, as everybody constantly gets older, I decided I wanted to be part of the solution and at least help. So I started Boilearn, and then decided, well, I might as well move, because it doesn't really matter where I am. So I wanted to move where The tax law is a little bit
Yeah.
more
No,
favorable, but
no
wanted to
income
move.
tax.
Yeah, I wanted to move where people vacation, so I moved to Florida. And there's still boilers in Florida, not as much as in the north, but there's still tons of process, tons of manufacturing in Florida. There's a boiler company 10 minutes down the road from where I live, a service company, and I've made relationships with the boiler companies in Florida, but it's people are saying, "Oh, why'd you move to Florida?" And I wanted to try something different, and I had the opportunity to. I can always move back to Ohio, or I can move somewhere else. But I would, as you said, you were in your 30s, you're getting older, looking at your opportunities. I was looking at my opportunities and said, "Hey, I'm not married. I don't have any kids. So really no attachment. What's the worst that can happen? I moved to Florida and love it. So, you know,
Yeah,
here
that's
I am."
that's how I keep track of how long I've been here. My daughter just turned 13. We moved here 6 weeks after she was born, so it's almost been 13 years. I mean, you're definitely right about teaching and working, because for 4 years, I taught 2 to 4 nights a week at College of DuPage, PLC programming and processing control instrumentation classes. And I'd leave work at SCC. I'd drive to the college from 6 to 10. Basically, I'd be in the classroom. And that really, it wasn't necessarily for the pay. The pay wasn't great, but I really enjoyed doing it. But it got to the point where, this is way too much work. And so when I took the job at FireEye, where I had to start traveling more for work, I had to give that up, which I miss it, but I don't miss it, because I would like to do it, and in a perfect world, maybe that would be my main job. Monday through Friday I teach. As much as I like this, I do like that just as much. And so you're getting to experience that. And I think your idea is a good one. I mean, boiler specific training is kind of a blue ocean. I mean, there's some other companies doing it, but it's a lot of room for expansion there.
There are plenty of other companies do it, but a lot of times they never get past the 101 level. They never get past the general operator level. And when you have all these service companies, no matter what equipment you work on, as we said, boilers are basically the same. Like, the physics is the same. And you have all these service companies all struggling to hire and train people. And, it's no secret that smaller service contractors don't have millions of dollars to just blow in a training facility and training budgets, like some larger companies, even outside of the boiler industry. And how do we help them? And every single company doesn't need to come up with their own individual training program and hire a full-time trainer who is going to be a salary of over $100,000 and to build the system from ground up. It is very, very difficult. So, like in the HVAC industry, there are companies that all they do is make training and YouTube videos and books and all these resources that companies can plug into their company model and give to their employees and build systems around. And that's really what I'm aiming to do, is plug in resources that other companies can easily adopt, and coming somebody that has worked in the industry and knows the problems firsthand, instead of some third-party education company that is just coming in to make a quick buck. There's a huge difference. And then it's also looking from a perspective of, we're not teaching information, but we have to be able to teach action. And it doesn't matter how much you know, it's how much you can apply, especially when you're in service and you have to go out and fix a problem. But if you're in sales, you have to go out and diligently talk about what you're selling, the products you're selling, and evaluate a current steam system. And if you just kind of know information, but you don't know how to apply it, and don't know what you're looking at, it's going to be a struggle. And then companies get frustrated with you, customers get frustrated with you, and it's this whole cycle. And then companies say, "Hey, well, we can't train anybody, we can't hire anybody. It seems like nobody wants to work, and we can't train them." And the truth of the matter, the unfortunate truth of the matter, is so many companies, their onboarding process isn't even 8 hours long. and you can't expect somebody to come into an industry and know nothing and have a less than 8 hour onboarding process and then just on the job training for 6 months and hope they figure it out.
Yeah, that's pretty common. Here's a computer, here's a cell phone. Yeah, start working. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've always wondered this. Do you know how Cleaver Brooks got started in Thomasville, Georgia? Like, why Thomasville?
Yeah, they acquired another company that was based out of there. They were making boilers in Lebanon, Pennsylvania before that. They had a factory there. They acquired this other company, and then moved the operations down there, and that was in the 90s.
Got it. It's just kind of a Thomasville, Georgia is not like it's not a spot where you would look on a map and be like, this is where I want to start a boiler manufacturing facility. It's kind
Yeah.
of a unique area of the
Well,
United States.
a lot of people live in Florida, in Tallahassee. That's where you would fly to if you were to visit.
Yeah.
So it's not terribly far from there.
Just across the border. And a little over a year ago, Cleaver Brooks was acquired by Mura. Is there any like the what is are there any changes the customers will see from that, or is that more of a hold and you guys keep doing what you're doing?
I mean, as of right now, I don't know. I don't know any inside information, but it's really been the same. We do, uh, talk with our colleagues at Mira America to some extent now, which is good. It's always good to have more collaboration, but nothing's really different
All right.
for
Yeah,
us.
that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're making money in operations, you can always
Yeah.
tweak stuff, but there's no reason to come in and start tearing stuff out and make tons of changes when you already provide
Well,
a
observe for a while, and then maybe make changes for the better, right? After you give it some time. That's what I'd probably expect to see.
yeah,
For us,
absolutely.
it's a great thing. We're acquired by, I don't want to say anything negative about our former owner, and I'm not. I mean, but it was an equity group. But it is nice to be acquired by a boiler company, when you are a boiler company. So, that was the biggest change.
Yeah,
Because
same.
the equity companies, have a long-term plan of, reselling the company. I mean, that's just how they work. So, they were good owners while they were the owners, but then you knew that at some point the company was going to get sold, and you just hoped that it would be a better situation that you'd be getting yourself into. Because not every equity company was as good as the one we had before. Some of them are a little bit more demanding than others. So.
And as far as teaching people, you have kind of a controls PLC background. As far as teaching people, do you think it's easier to teach an electrician boilers or to teach a boiler guy electricity?
Well, that's a good question, because I've talked about this to some of my other friends. Jerry Wills. We talk a lot about this very topic. When I was teaching the class, I think in the very beginning of the class, you could always tell who had the aptitude to do it. You'd have a mix. I'd have a mix. So it was a community college, so I'd have a mix of anywhere from 18-year-olds that just didn't really want to be there to, people in job retraining that had to be there. And some people would take right up until the last minute, and they could barely figure out how to send an email. And you just knew that person was never going to learn anything, as hard as they try. But some people, they are good at everything right away. They're done with all the assignments by 8:00 and they're going home. So I think the people that understand electrical probably have a more analytical or scientific or math type of mind, and they probably will learn better. I'm just thinking because their aptitude is probably higher. But that doesn't mean that people that get the boilers aren't going to learn the electricity. It just might take them longer. I think the people that are better at the boiler stuff from the beginning, they're maybe the more artistic-minded people, might be more thorough. So it's kind of a give and take. The electrical people that are good at the logic problems, they can probably pick it up, but they might be a little bit fast and hasty. The people that are a little bit harder for them to grasp, I think that they'll just be more careful to do a good job, take their time. So I think they're both effective for different reasons. Might be easier to teach the person that's good at electrical, but I think when you teach the person that's good at the boiler side, they might, end up being a little bit more thoughtful at what they do.
yeah, that's good. I only know my experiences. I've obviously never lived somebody else's life, but I found that I had a lot of success because I can imagine and conceptualize a boiler system in my head and kind of see moving parts. And, you start narrowing down problems. And I guess not everybody can do that. And they have a very narrow vision and tunnel vision of their thinking. And if you can't have like 3D spatial awareness of what's going on, it's going to be very, very difficult to understand a complex boiler system. And then even like electricity of especially something that you can't see. I mean, if you see electricity, you're doing something wrong. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of understanding how electricity flows, why stuff is wired how it is. And I mean, it as you said, it takes a different kind of person. And I mean, I think it's just the boiler industry has gotten very electrical heavy, and the current electrical training for people who start with boilers is very spotty and subpar and not always like the best. And I think that's why a lot of people think that electrical people make better boiler people, is because they have a better electrical foundation, and they, even though that they may not understand a boiler system, they can read a ladder diagram and figure out a problem because they understand electricity.
Yeah, I would say, I came up in the electrical side primarily. I mean, it wasn't how I started, but I have an electrician's license. There was a time when I had a side business making electric cars, which was a whole nother story, converting cars to electric. But I would say, like, from what I just said, I would understand what I was learning about the boilers pretty easily and quickly. But my problem that I always have to stay within myself is that I can tend to work too fast, or like I was saying, I might go rush ahead. And I've really worked at trying to be more thoughtful and methodical. And I think I've done a good job of that. But to what you were saying, you're thinking of it that way right from the start. And that's probably a better way to approach it. But it might not be as easy for people to think that way to grasp all the concepts. But I think they will. That's why I said I think they'd be more thoughtful in the long run. Somebody that's seeing the whole picture.
Yeah, it's unfortunately humans are not computers, and you can't just download information, and everyone is different, even though you can take tests and find personality traits that are the same between people. And it's building a system that everybody can learn in, and not is just geared towards the people who are top of the list and get things the first time and can self starters and can go solve problems. You have to be for everybody. And I kind of think about, and I've never been in the armed forces, but I kind of think about like the Army and the Air Force. They accept a wide range of people, and yes, you have the different test scores, but at a certain point, like, they teach people to work on helicopters and tanks and all their equipment. And, they don't just say, yeah, we can't find anybody. They have a very structured process for teaching people. And I think just with the current trends and markets of how boilers are, it's just get somebody in the door. All right, great. And then throw them out into the boiler room, which you're not going to succeed with. And there's companies that do have great training programs, but there's also a lot that don't. And it's very difficult on the employee side, especially if you have a family and kids, and you can't dedicate a couple years to just hammering out, trying to learn and sink and swim, because you're going to sink, get frustrated. And a lot of people leave the industry at that point and say, hey, this is not for me. I'm going to go do something else because I want to be home with my family more. Or, they don't provide support or training, which is,
Yeah. Or they don't, or when you're a beginner or an apprentice, as you might say, you don't get as many opportunities. For 3 years, you're just doing grunt work and you're never really trusted. And that's what'll pique your interest and keep you, engaged. But if they never really let you move beyond, the grunt work, of course, you're probably going to burn out and not like it.
yeah, it's hard to trust somebody when they don't know something, or you have somebody that does it better. Like, why would we send Timmy to go set combustion when we have John who's been doing it for 20 years? And oh, Timmy might make a mistake, so like, why would we trust him with that?
That's kind of the important point, is the role of the mentor. The good mentors are not trying to protect their job, because they're confident that, their job is secure already. But sometimes you have people in a role of mentorship that really don't want to let go of any of their knowledge. And I can think of a couple cases, I won't say who obviously, but that were really bad with this. Great technicians, but they really were not great at sharing what they knew. And, you know, everybody can see it. And that kind of hurts the people they work with, obviously, right? Because they're not helping the next generation move forward. And I think your point about the military is interesting, because they've been very good at what they've been doing for a long time, but they really just break you down to make you the same as everybody else, right? They take away your individuality. I don't think such a method would really work in the private sector. But if it could, I guess you could probably more effectively train people.
Well, it's they have a captive audience. So if you, I think we could be way more successful and said, hey, if you join this job, you have to stay for 5 years. You would be able to force people through their mental roadblocks and mental hurdles where they say, I'm out, this is hard. And you could get them over the hump. But the whole military thing is like, if the military can teach people to work on a helicopter, like there's no excuse why we can't teach people to work on a boiler. Like a helicopter's pretty complicated. It's got complicated controls. Boilers not as complicated. And I just think it's a process of time and training over a long period of time. You can't expect somebody to be an expert in 3 months. But the problem is your phone doesn't stop ringing and you constantly have customers calling. So what do? You just start throwing people at problems because something's better than nothing. And
yeah, but you're right. It's a captive audience. I mean, the people in the military, eventually get used to that lifestyle, and some of them thrive on it. Some of them don't, but they did produce a lot of boiler techs. Nobody can deny that.
And that's probably one of our problems is the Navy shutting off and discontinuing the boiler technician program. If you go into any operating plant and see somebody that is 55 and older, they were probably from the Navy. And, they got out of the Navy. That's where they learned boilers. And then that's how they got into the boiler industry, became a steam, operator and whatnot. And we don't have that funnel anymore. We don't have that channel, and we're used to having that channel. And so how do we, that was a huge training resource and huge funnel of people, and that got shut off. And now, those people are retiring and there's not as many people to replace them. And you start squirming and finding out that posting on Indeed or, a job channel or posting on social media doesn't actually get qualified people to come about if you don't know how to attract them and then train them, which is difficult for companies that, you make 5 to 10% margin, sometimes as a contractor. You can't hire a full-time recruiter just to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on finding people and training people. Like, it's at the end of the day, you gotta stay in business.
Yeah, and everything's changing. I mean, even for contractors, a lot more of them are expected to do design builds now, and it's like they weren't doing that 20 years ago. And now in some places, that's all they're doing. And so they've had to start getting mechanical engineers and things like that on staff. And everybody has to adapt to everything's changing. Everybody wants somebody else to do as much as possible, so.
Yeah, it's mechanical engineers. It's a lot of overhead. You can't always bill out 40 hours of salary. And, how do you float that overhead? And when a boiler job, you might bid on something or have somebody come to you, you might not get a PO till a year and a half from that. So it's, how do you float in between, those numbers?
Yeah.
And it's a long-term life cycle, which is
That's
very
also
difficult.
That's also what's kept the boiler industry somewhat recession-proof. You're working a year to 2 years in arrears, and by the time the recession's over, Now you're starting to feel it. Everybody's back to normal, and you're now, you're a little late because you weren't picking up the orders during that time, right? You're always a little bit behind. You're backlogged, and you keep working, and everything's good because everything's so out into the future.
Do you think the boiler industry is growing or shrinking?
Well, I think it's growing. I mean, part of the reason it's recession proof, we're always building houses, we're always building industry, even when things aren't good because the population's growing. So I think it's simply because of that, that it's growing. I can't say the rate, but the population is always growing. We're always building out further and further away from city centers, at least domestically, and it's probably not a lot different globally. A lot of places are getting bigger, and you got to build more houses, and you got to build more stuff.
Yeah, so I read, I forget where
Might
I
not
read
be
it.
all, but it might not be all boilers, right? It could also be other things, but
Yeah, I read that a lot of, and really manufacturing drives the boiler industry. The residential side is definitely shrinking. Very, very few homes have boilers in them these days, as far as new build, but that's a very small fraction of the market. As far as the manufacturing side, I read that a lot of manufacturers are holding on to boilers from the 50s and 70s, and they have been putting off the capital investment cost of replacing those boilers, as is normally a larger water tube, and then it's millions and millions of dollars, and they keep deferring those capital costs, and eventually they can't defer them, and it's gonna that era of boilers are gonna wear out, and the industry will see an influx of orders from the boilers from the 50s to the 70s that are wearing out, that
you
these,
have to be replaced.
yeah, they've offset these capital costs of millions of dollars, and eventually they can't do it anymore, and that will spike the industry. But as for now, it's a pretty steady taper of growth, and yeah,
Well,
I
it
see.
changes though. It depends what you're tracking. So back when there was a lot of expansion, they were always building new schools out in Washington, and they were always getting a little bit further away from Seattle. And when it comes to new construction, the levies to raise tax money, the capital money is always there. So they would buy as the best equipment they possibly could. Sometimes include service contracts and things like that because the money at the beginning's there. It's the money that they get to maintain stuff that they don't have, right? So they might buy a nice boiler because they get the money up front, but they don't necessarily get the budget to maintain it. But you'd see that that growth continue to happen, and that was all in the commercial and above categories. Our company sold residential boilers, but I wasn't. That was more, something I was a little bit less involved with. But now you're seeing the market. You're seeing a lot of it shift to decentralization, more hot water, more condensing. But you're still seeing a lot of boilers. It's not necessarily the same types of boilers. City central steam, college central steam plants. A lot of those are being decommissioned, and you're putting hot water boilers in the different buildings. Same with city centers. We were talking with Ray about Pittsburgh City Steam, right? Seattle City Steam is a tiny little plant now and I'm sure it's like this in every old city at this point, decommissioned, and everybody's running on their own, with hydronic boilers for the most part, sometimes low pressure boilers. But you're just seeing a shift to different types of equipment. But I think, you're always going to have expansion. You're always going to have new buildings going up, replacements. I can't really see it declining too much. It might not be a real heavy growth, but I would see it at least being steady.
I look at like chillers, and I see the data centers that are going up, and that market is going crazy. And with AI and all this, like I made a post probably a month ago that electrical generation seems cool again now, because like these companies are restarting nuclear plants to power these AI data centers that are just heat sinks, and how do we cool them? And then you need chillers and all this stuff. And yes, the boiler industry is changing, definitely a lot more hydronic, and it's figuring out, the cost of energy has never been higher, and it's figuring out how do we get the same output at the most efficient way. And condensing boilers are a great opportunity to do that. You just have to have a system that is designed for condensing boilers. And a lot of people do not have that in a retrofit situation, and they get lackluster results because they're not running the
That's
boilers and
true. You
condensing.
gotta do it right. And the other thing is, and it's not a knock on how any company builds their condensing boilers, including mine, but the condensing boiler is not lasting 50 years. So that's going to have some sort of built-in replacement schedule. Let's say 10 to 15 in this case, as opposed to 50 to 80, whatever it is. If you take care of it, you could take care of your condensing boiler very, very well, and you probably have a good life if it was 15 years.
Yeah, even with the electronics, it's how electronics are moving. Electrical in boilers for programmers and stuff it's pretty rough till about 2015. We didn't start getting into like more of a modern, I kind of look at the iPhone. Like the iPhone made giant advances, and in the last couple years they're just kind of the differences are very, very thin because we've kind of innovated so fast that unless they start making a big change with the technology, you can only make the phone so thin, and you can only make the battery life last so long. People aren't impressed by battery life in thin phones anymore. That's kind of become just standard. Same thing with boilers is you get these PLCs, these touchscreens on the front. That touchscreen is not going to be serviceable in 30 years. And like
most likely not.
It's going to obsolete itself, and you're not going to be able to get parts. And that's
that's the way things are going in general, like across the board. Have you ever heard of something called Moore's Law, where they said the transistors would get twice as powerful and half as expensive every 2 years? And it kind of shows you how things get better and better and better. But you reach a saturation point, like you said. iPhones came out in the mid 2000s, I believe.
2007.
Yeah, and they at this point, they're quite different, obviously, but how much have they changed in the last? People still have iPhone 7s, and they're pretty much the same as an iPhone 17. So,
do you see
not much
how much change do you see in the boiler market for electric boilers? Is that
that's very location based. Like for us, a lot of it has to do with laws. So I think our biggest customers are in Canada, where certain areas have cheaper hydropower as well as laws that are favorable to using electric boilers. So then we'll sell more of them there. So I think a lot of that is going to have to do with the legislation in place in different places, and if the location has low cost power. And there was a funny story from a colleague in the Netherlands, and he was telling me that his company gets paid to use electricity during the day. In Europe, it's very different because every country is a small country, relatively speaking, and they're not all European Union like harmonized when it comes to everything. So within the Netherlands, this area has too much power, and they're paying people to use electricity during the day. He said there's companies that are just like heat sinking electricity just to generate money. They're buying equipment just to waste electricity because there's so much extra electricity that they can't use that you're actually going to be charged money to put electricity into the grid and given money to take it out during these periods because they don't want people creating solar power and such. But then there's parts of Germany that are right next to them that have a shortage of electricity, and they just haven't figured out how to get it there yet. So, it really depends, I think, on the supply and demand of electricity as well, to a large extent. And I think that's also going to be true for other things like hydrogen. I think you mentioned another one. When hydrogen is cheap, people find a way to use it. That's where people are using it right now, when they're getting it cheap or free. So when people are getting electricity, and there was parts of Washington State where electricity was incredibly cheap, and even back in the 90s, people were using electric boilers in those locations because they were getting it very cheap. So it was cheaper for them to use the electric boilers, so they did. I think that's what's going to drive people, laws or availability. So I think it'll grow, but I really think it depends on how the legislation tracks. If they're being forced to use it, obviously that helps. But that seems to be going the other way now, and things go up and down with the government. It's one way or it's the other, right?
very unpredictable and blowing with the winds. Do you think the US has enough strict, and it varies state by state, but do you think there's enough strict laws around boiler operators and who can work on a boiler? Or do you think, like, I know in Europe and Canada, they have a lot stricter universal laws on kind of the training level and education of who's certified to work on what and what size of boiler?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Canada they even have stricter laws about what's approved to be used on a boiler as far as like controls and stuff like that. If they've been approved by the provincial body. If they haven't, you can't use it. So they even have strict rules about that. But I think that in the United States, our state by state model leaves a lot of gaps. And so, like, I know in Illinois, where I live, for electricians, you don't have to be state licensed. So that's scary. That's a scary thought, right? And boiler technicians really aren't licensed anywhere, as far as I know. I think Oregon has a license that they've interpreted to be required for boiler technicians. And I had to get that when I lived there. One day it wasn't. And then one day they had a new state boiler inspector, and he said everybody needs this license. So, that's a good step towards the positive. But they really don't have a state licensing program that's more like a electrician or a plumber program where you get a standardized test. If they had something like that, that would be a good start towards safety. But I think the way it is, some places require operators, some have every place that requires operators pretty much has a limit. You'll just see people selling a boiler just below the limit, or like an Ohio special or something like that, right? You're going to see people find a way, we're going to sell a whole bunch of 399s, like 20 of them, because that's the highest you can go,
I think the most ridiculous one is the 9.5 horsepower in California. And I've seen a boiler room with 39.5 horsepower boilers. I don't know what the law is over 10 horsepower.
That might be a NOx related law.
Yeah, but you got 30 flame safeguards, 30 low water cutoffs. It's like just the maintenance on that is incredible.
Yeah.
But
we only need like 20 of them to work. So you have like 7 of them that don't even have parts in them anymore, probably, right? You can imagine.
Yeah, and you get donor boilers, and it's, oh, well, this one doesn't work, and so we're just pulling parts off this, and all of a sudden you walk in and the whole boiler room's a mess because you don't know what works and what doesn't, and you haven't paid for parts in years because everything's used coming off the donor boilers, and yeah, that's a mess.
Yeah, I mean, you get different. I mean, you always have too many accidents, I guess, right? But fortunately, we don't hear about something every day of the week, at least. But I certainly think that that's something that would be better if it was more standardized across the country. I know we are more in favor of state by state rules, but at least if states started having licensing programs or something like that, I think that would be a good step towards safety. I mean, it would be a barrier to getting more techs, but with an apprenticeship program, people could get that license, and then it would have a little bit more value as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I would think it would give companies a better path in order to train people. It'd set more of a standard, but it would also keep the people out. And it's hard as a boiler company, if you have mechanical engineers on staff and, you're training people and everybody has a combustion analyzer and you're trying to hold yourself to a high bar. And then, Joe's HVAC from down the street is bidding the same job as you. And then you lose out because they underbid you and they send somebody into the boiler room that, has a residential combustion analyzer, and, they have no idea what they're doing. It doesn't do the industry any service when the customer looks at them they view you the same. And, you can say, oh, well, you need to educate them. The customer's really not going to be educated until their equipment doesn't work or something happens, and then they'll call the expert. But at the time, on a bid sheet, they both look the same, but really one person's unqualified and one person's qualified. And, you end up with this race to the bottom with contracting, which is very, very difficult to compete with.
Yeah. I think the areas that have the union pipe fitters or steam fitters doing this, like I know Minnesota, I've worked in the training hall for the union. Jay's very involved in the union in his area, and he does training in Ann Arbor, I know, as well. The places that have in Chicago a strong union as well. The places with the unions, I think you get a little bit more steady flow of competent technicians, and you have places with trade schools as well. But I don't know, in your area in Ohio, was it a big area of union where you were coming up?
No, area I was at, if it would just be the HVAC people were thrown in with the pipe fitters union, and the unions are very. It depends on the area, and it depends how specialized the union is. And if they just start throwing in a ton of trades into a union, it's like, well, how does this union represent everybody? And if the majority of your members are a pipe fitter, that job is wildly different than a specialized combustion technician that works on boilers. And you obviously can't have 100 unions, and a union for boiler people, even the Boilermaker union, that's a wildly different job than somebody working on the technical side. And it's hard. I've never been part of a union, so I don't know the inside story of it, but it is hard to train and educate when you have a large array of people in different jobs all in the same union. And I think a lot of times companies then rely on the union for training, and the union, as far as I know, like they try, like, but they're more on the commercial side of training. And like, I don't know a union that has industrial water tube training, or that will train on more complicated control systems for boilers. Like it's more of
It'd be
a
harder
yeah. I
for
mean,
them to do that.
it's a very niche market, but you still have to train people to get there. And so then the training ends up being on the companies, and it's very difficult for companies to train people and set up programs when you may only have a couple customers for that, or it's only a couple people. It's a very big investment to try to train somebody on a very, very specialized system, or larger boilers and SCADA systems and all that stuff, and also do everything else. And I mean, it's a volume game. Contracting is a volume game, and the more specialized you get, the more you have to charge. And if customers aren't willing to pay that price, it's hard. There's
Yeah,
not.
at the college at DePage where I used to teach, they have an HVAC program that touches on boilers, but it's more of giving a graduate a general HVAC education. But the union hall where when I was a fire, I used to go there and do once every class. I'd go do a training class for them on the NXF 4000 controls, and they have good instructors that have a lot of experience, and they're really just boiler focused. And their union hall training center actually has all the different boilers installed. They have a lot more equipment, and it's a little bit less general HVAC and more boiler focused. And the apprentices take jobs with different companies and learn on the job as well. I think the places with the unions are maybe pushing a little bit more technicians out into the workforce. Whether they stay union or not, I don't know in the long run, but that is another source of, like you said, right now the way we're getting new burner techs and boiler techs is kind of all over the place. But as long as we can get some here and there, it's, of course, it all does come down to training, and what you're trying to do could be a conduit for that as well, in the long run, because those opportunities aren't all there.
Yeah. All the training companies could do 100% more, and we wouldn't even touch the surface of what needs to be done. So it's,
yeah, there's so many types, so many different types of training you can do. I mean, as when you're in sales, right? You sell, you target your sales pitch to who you're selling to. You target your training to who you're training. If you're training a salesperson, you could offer a training class with a different set of requirements than when you're training somebody that's going to actually be fixing a boiler. Maybe the salesperson just needs to know fundamentals and doesn't need to go that deep. Obviously somebody doing service needs to know a lot more. So there's so many different types. I mean, we're talking about service techs, but look at all the salespeople, engineers, everybody else coming into the trade. It certainly helps for them to learn as well. I mean, Cleaver Brooks has a lot of online training classes for our reps and employees. Online. It's a start, right? But it's something that if we all take the time to take, it can give us some fundamentals. But not everybody has that.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. You got to build structure. You got to build a system, and you can't expect a couple of training classes here and there, just a hodgepodge or whatever comes along to make somebody competent. And if you don't have that system, if you don't have goals, if you don't say, hey, in 1 year, we want you to know this, or in 6 months, we want you to know this, and this is what we're working towards. And that's part of what we were talking about earlier, is giving people a growth path and a future of, this is how we want you to grow and proceed in your career. Asking the question, is this actually what you want to do? Like, if we spend all this money on you, is this what you want to do? Or did you just get this job because you saw it paid more dollars an hour than another job, and you hate your life showing up, and you have no desire to learn about boilers? Like, that's fine too, but we're not going to spend $50,000 over the next year trying to train you on a industry or a career that you hate and are just going to leave at the first opportunity to go make $1 an hour somewhere else.
Well, when I worked at Carrier, I started doing a postgraduate program in college, and it was Carrier at that time was owned by UTC, which is a United Technologies, part of Raytheon now, and they were always famous for their employee scholar program. So in the past, they would let you get a degree in whatever you wanted and pay for the whole thing, and there was no requirement that it had anything to do with your job, and they didn't even really mind if you resigned your job at the end of it. They were doing it as a benefit. And they figured overall, the employees will be happy. They really won't leave, actually. And, that actually panned out to be pretty well true. Well, eventually they changed it so it needed to be peripheral to your job. And, now Cleaver Brooks has a similar program that I've continued to take part in. They do have some requirements that you have to pay them back if you don't work a certain amount of time. I don't know if you can do that for an entry or a lower level person coming in training on the job. But if you have some kind of a hook, or we'll train you, but, we're asking for you to stay for up, maybe 2 years or something like that, some reasonable amount of time, that could be a way to handle that, to make the investment justifiable, because really what I think you want to show is that you're more interested in the person and their growth. But at the same time, you don't really want to be just a charity either, right? You have to get something in return. So, I don't know that you can expect the young person that you're training to stay with you forever anymore. That's unrealistic. But, hopefully you can get some good years out of them, at the right time.
Well, from the company owner's point of view, it's like, well, why would I spend all this money and time on somebody just for them to go work for my competitor for $5 more an hour? And, that's kind of what everybody is doing right now. It's, hey, we'll let our competitors find the people and train them, and then we're just going to hire them out. And it's easy to pay an extra $5 more an hour when you're desperate and they know something then, but it's hard to pay their normal $1 an hour and all the costs, and then also, all the unbillable time that you spend on them. And, you can have that small contract of, 1 or 2 years, and, this is investment on you. But at the end of the day, they basically have all the right to leave at any point in time. And, it's hard from the company's point of view when, you may only have 10 technicians and, you're training your 11th and you spend all this money on them and then they leave, to keep doing that over and over and over again. And, everybody says, oh, well, you just need to make a company that, where people don't leave and the culture is so great. Well, at a certain point in time, you can only make the culture and work-life balance of a boiler service company or boiler sales so good. Like, at a certain point in time, the job is going to suck. Like, there's nothing elegant about boilers, and especially when you're starting to learn and doing those dirty jobs and maybe the jobs that people don't want to do. Like it's going to be hard. You're going to be thrown into situations where you don't know and don't have answers, and you can't just hide behind a whole team of people and push emails and paperwork and come in on a Friday and just kind of hide in the corner of the office. Like that's not what the boiler industry is. You got to solve problems, especially if you're in front of a customer.
Yeah, I'd like to see also a way to figure out, we have ABMA taking some steps towards this, but to get some more female representation across the board. We have certain segments of the boiler industry where you're going to have more females, but there's not a lot of them in technical or engineering side of things. And I just think having that diversity would change the dynamic a little bit, and I think for the better, because you have kind of a certain culture, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily it's a different kind of culture you have, I would say. And if we had some more women in the industry, it'd be a little different.
Yeah, I mean, I always propose if we can't hire and train people that are naturally gravitated towards the industry, how are we going to train people that would typically not think about boilers? So if the general public doesn't even know what a boiler is, typically women are also not going to know what a boiler is. So how do we like that just goes into the training and outreach of, we have to make the industry visible, and we don't want visibility on 5 o'clock news because a manufacturing facility blew up a boiler. We want visibility as in constantly showing up at career fairs. But even then, before then, like you really have to start in the middle schools and early high school. Like if you start outreaching at junior, senior year, it's already too late. People are making college enrollment, college or other jobs, other careers. And, then if they go to college, you got to start talking to freshmen and sophomores and maybe get an internship for freshmen and sophomores. If you start talking to juniors and seniors, anybody who's worth anything already they already had an internship, or they already have another career opportunity somewhere else in another industry, and it's too late to grab them.
Well, there's so many people that didn't, though, as well. Like my daughter, she's 27, my oldest, and she did a welding program, and in the end, she didn't end up becoming a welder because I think the industry intimidated her a little. And I don't actually think this is just boilers. I think it's trades. The trades are very male-dominated, a little bit, I would say, the macho culture, to a certain extent. And I think that intimidates not only a lot of women, but some men as well. So I think that I'd like to see that change happen, to find a way to get more variety of different people in the industry. Our first problem is just getting people at all. But, in my wish list, I'd like to see that happen over time, make it a little more inclusive.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always room for growth and improvement. It's just figuring out how to do it, and also keep the steam generating and the heat on, which is hard to do.
Yeah, you always say, what does the customer want? Fancy this or that? And it's like, no, actually what the customer wants is steam. Like, there's some, however you give them the steam, that's what the customer actually wants. They don't care about the type of control system it has necessarily. They care about the things that come with that. Like, is it easy to maintain? Is it going to keep running? All those things. But at the end, all they want is steam all the time, no downtime. And if you can sell them on something with that promise, you'll have steam as much as you want, no downtime. That's what the customer wants. They don't necessarily want a specific brand of anything. They want the relationship with you and trust in you that they're going to get steam,
Yeah, and that's sometimes hard to think about because a lot of companies are so focused on the details, and you have to think about it from the customer's perspective of when does your customer call you? When the boiler room is amazing and there's no alarms, or when there's tons of alarms? So
it depends who you're talking to. The person that's in charge of the entire hospital system just wants to know, can we get steam? How reliable? How cheap? then the guy in the boiler room, he wants to know like what brand of ball valve you're using. Like everybody wants to know. Some different things are important to different people. And you got to keep in mind who you're talking to when you're telling them something.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, anything else? I mean, I could talk for hours, but
No, I think we've said it all, quite possibly.
I don't know. It's
Get to know you better here than in person. Guess I'll probably see you again. I think the last time I saw you was you might have come around our booth at AHR and saw the new control system.
I tried to come around at HR the last time, but you were constantly mobbed by people.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll keep in touch then. It's been good to talk
Absolutely.
to you. Yeah.